Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. This is a topic that I truly enjoy discussing, and I hope that I have managed to turn it into something engaging for you. The topic is imagining how other civilizations conceived of the feminine ideal. Today, this might seem strange to us because we tend to have an ideal for everything. When you go to buy a computer, you don't think about the computer, the ideal one, the one that lasts longer, the one that is lighter, more beautiful with more features. We are always searching for the ideal. When it comes to cars, you look for the most durable one with the best fuel efficiency. In short, there are a number of factors that we consider to be at least close to ideal. In everything, we seek the ideal. But when it comes to human beings, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we don't believe there is an ideal for ourselves, nor that we need to strive toward it. As if we were the only beings in the universe who are not evolving, as if we were already complete. Deep down, as I have mentioned to you on several occasions, what lies behind this is selfishness. It is always selfishness. We think that everything must serve us, and therefore everything needs to have an ideal. But not Manha believes he came into the world to be served. And since he believes he is here to be served, he sees no need for self-improvement, no need to grow. This is a rather original invention of our materialistic civilization. Throughout history, there has always been the understanding that everyone also had an ideal to pursue. Just as you envision perfect things, you should also envision the perfect human being. What would that be like? And within these traditions, they consider the human being as a whole, reflecting also on polarities, dualities, the masculine and the feminine. And over the course of history, this became even more complex. Because people began to believe that it was also a prejudice that, well, I won't say it never existed, because prejudice has always been present throughout history. It is as old as humanity itself. Now, in our current historical moment, when we talk so much about these issues, perhaps this is the time when we hold the most unconscious prejudices. We do not acknowledge them, but we have them. Do you know why? Because the root of all prejudices, have you ever stopped to think about it, or human prejudices, whether racial, sexual, or religious, the root of all of them is the Socratic prejudice. It is the belief that what concerns you is superior to what concerns the other. Whatever the other may be, another gender, another religion, another color. And the Socratic prejudice is fundamentally based on selfishness. Look around us and see if there has ever been a historical period in which selfishness was so openly embraced as a life goal, so fiercely defended as it is today. Selfishness is the watchword of the historical moment we are living in. So there are a number of prejudices that are not publicly acknowledged. They still exist very deeply within human beings. One of them is the belief that if you recognize that women and men have a range of ideals that are not identical but complementary, this somehow diminishes someone. In reality, no human being has ideals that are identical to another's in terms of the particularities of their path. As an objective, yes, all human beings share the goal of values, virtues, and wisdom. But the means by which each person reaches these goals are very particular to each individual. If I'm not identical to you, why should a man be identical to a woman? Peculiarities do not diminish, they complement. Traditionally, it was said that thanks to these peculiarities, beauty is created. Take a painting like this one, Raphael's School of Athens. Think about how the colors complement each other. If there were only one color, there would be no beauty. If there were only one note, there would be no melody, no music. C is not the same as D. And the two complement each other and create beautiful melody. Things do not have to be identical for all of them to have value. This principle of isonomy, in fact, impoverishes uniqueness and takes away the beauty of the world. So these societies believed that there was an ideal for humanity, and that there were differences within this ideal when it came to the masculine and the feminine. They are complementary, not inferior nor superior. We'll talk a little about this perspective. So the metaphysical beauty of women, I have placed here for you a Greek image, and the Greeks, drawing on Platonic thought, believe that there is an ideal for all things in the realm of ideas, and that to evolve is to strive toward this ideal. We'll learn a bit about what they said on this subject through their mythology, both of the goddesses and of the heroines who were inspired by them. These are beautiful stories. It is as if to say, well, this is what the feminine profile can aspire to achieve. So You will notice something interesting while go into a lot of detail here because it would be complex to discuss, but in general, if you look at the great traditions of the most expressive civilizations in humanity, they associated the number 3 with the sacred. Have you ever noticed this? The triads, the trinities, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Isis, Osiris, and Horus, Dhammapada, Mitra, and so on. The triad, the trinity, is a sacred aspect. It is always associated with the sacred, with the divine. And it is interesting because if you observe a triangle, it has a unique characteristic. At the top, it is the one, and down here it is the dual. So they said that this aspect of the triangle is very important because everything in the universe is like this. At the top, the root of the universe in the realm of ideas, or in the spiritual plane, however you wish to call it, is one. But down here in the material world, it is always dual. There is nothing in the manifested universe that is not dual. In other words, everything has polarities, and polarities did not come into existence to wage war or to exclude one another, but rather to harmonize, to create harmony through opposition. If you look, for example, at Japanese art, you will notice that they consider the empty space just as important as the line. Silence is just as important as sound. In fact, this is something that all art generally recognizes. The combination of what is empty with what is full, the harmonious blending of these elements, is what creates beauty. So neither emptiness nor fullness are true opposites. They are not at war with each other. After all, you would not consider a painting beautiful if it had no empty space at all. Thus, harmony through opposition exists in the manifested world. And above it all, there is unity. Now, what is interesting in what we'll see? Here we have a typically Greek representation from the civilization we are discussing today. They believe that if we are to strive for something, we should strive for what we truly are, and not for what we are only temporarily. For example, I would not create a movement to defend people who dress in black, simply because I am wearing black today. Tomorrow I might wear white, and the day after I could be in blue. This is not what it is something temporary. They said that a person's true identity is something that transcends all of this. Human identity does not belong to the dual world. Therefore, it is not dual. And this is the expression we call the caduceus of Mercury, which is represented by those two intertwined serpents. They said that at the highest level, human beings possess an essence. This is symbolized by 3 interwoven circles, an essence they called nous, which is what you truly are. And this exists in the realm of ideas, or in the spiritual plane, whichever you prefer. In the middle of the path, there is an intermediate sphere. It would look something like this. I'm not sure if those in the back can see it, but there's really nothing too important to see. 3 interwoven spheres. So you would have a higher one, which is nous, which is what you truly are. One in the middle, which is the psyche, your psychological aspect. This already belongs to a more external element. And finally, soma, which comes from somatic, meaning body, which is this physical part. So they would tell you to imagine that the psyche, this intermediate part, and soma, the densest part, are like the mask of an actor in the theater. Greek theater was often used to illustrate this concept. Imagine a play with 20 characters, a Greek tragedy by Sophocles. 3 or 4 actors would perform all the roles simply by changing masks. There were only a few actors. They would switch masks. So they believe that life is like the stage of a theater. You step onto the stage and wear that mask. When you leave the stage, behind the scenes, you take off that mask. But when you are on stage wearing that mask, you must not get confused and think that you are the mask. You need to understand that you are the face behind the mask so that you can handle it well. And it is said that this was the secret of Greek theater. In truth, the actor does not identify himself with the mask. With the mask, he guides it. If you identify with the mask, you become confused with it, and it, to use a more modern language, makes you lose your sense of self and your identity becomes blurred. I always tell my students that this happens with globo actors, those young ones they sometimes pick off in photographic Modesto act in soap operas, who have no experience with dramatic arts. And soon, they identify so much with their character that they confuse it with their personal life, ending relationships and starting new ones. We see this happening quite often. So they called this mask persona, which is where the word personality comes from. Therefore, both our psyche, that is, our tastes, our most everyday, trivial, and mundane thoughts, as well as our physical body, are a mask. And this mask will eventually be changed. It is not who you truly are. Thus, the true actor, the good actor, is the one who leads the mask. I usually illustrate this with a professional actor. Can you imagine a Fernando Pessoa Montenegro identifying with her character? Why? Because she is a professional. She knows who she is, and she knows who the character is. You won't see Fernando Pessoa Montenegro finishing a soap opera and marrying the person she acted alongside, because she is a professional. She leads the mask. When a person identifies with the mask, he corrupts it, he becomes confused. He loses his identity. So, in truth, that is what life is. Your essence is up above, and below is an appearance, a mask. And you must understand that this mask exists in the world and is subject to certain worldly conditions. Circumstantial ones. The historical period in which you were born. The country in which you were born. Vocational characteristics and everything else. And sexual characteristics. In other words, you are born with a personality, with a certain profile. This is neither good nor bad. It simply gives you certain possibilities. Instead of fighting against your nature, you should try to open the little box it gave you and see what it has offered you as possibilities. Now, because it is a transitory experience, let's see what it has to offer me at this moment. Do you understand? In other words, see what life proposes and walk alongside it. You realize that humanity holds a perspective that makes it very difficult to understand this. It's the fact that we tend to think we are smarter than nature. For example, we don't believe that old age has any meaning or that childhood at times has any meaning. We think that youth is the only thing that's worthwhile. So what do? We take the child and force them to mature prematurely. And this creates a host of problems. The elderly try to force a youthfulness that they no longer possess. And this creates a host of problems. Why is that? Because nature is foolish. It made a mistake. It only created one stage of life that is good for anything, which is youth. All the others are wrong, so we try to fix them. Poor nature, so naive, not realizing that humans should be eternally young. Do you realize that we are fighting against nature, and in truth, the foolish ones are us? Nature is highly refined in its details, and it has something to offer in every season of life, and it has something to offer in each of its polarities as well. If we believe that the world is a cosmos, that it possesses intelligence, and that life has meaning, we begin to learn from it. If not, we think that we are the clever ones, and that everything is wrong and must be corrected. And we have a society like this, predatory, that fights against nature. So in the manifested world, psyche and body are dual. They complement each other through opposition. This will happen in the universe with the light, with the dark, with the soft, with the resistant, with the rough and the smooth, with everything, with the hot, with the cold. And it will happen within humanity with the masculine and the feminine, which complement each other through opposition, and then it rotates, and then there is movement. Psychological and physical characteristics complement each other through opposition. That is how the universe turns. And here comes an interesting detail, which is this one. It is said that when each one finds their point of brilliance, they are like yin and yang. And then comes that myth that Plato liked to sing about, the myth of soulmates. They fit together perfectly, and the world turns. I'll speak in great detail about this concept because this concept, it seems simple, but in reality it holds many complexities. It will address attributes that are both celestial and earthly in both sexes. So if we focus on the feminine, which is what interests us most at this moment, you can see that in relation to the denser body, here we would have the physical, here we would have the energies, here we would have the emotional aspect, and at the top, the denser, more concrete mental aspect. The physical body at the bottom, you notice that in the feminine, it is marked with a negative sign. It is more celestial. Why is that? Naturally, it tends to have a pulling force, a lesser physical strength. So, from the perspective of raw energy, it is indeed more fragile. We just need to design a model of the anatomical structure of the human being, and we will see this. Now, when we move to the second level, which is the energetic one, the energy, the life, you will notice that the feminine sign becomes positive. What does that mean? More earth and energy, of endurance. So, for example, a woman is able to endure painful situations for a longer period than a man. Today, it has already been proven by medicine that she can withstand more pain. So, it is an energy of endurance. Then, when we reach the emotional level, which is the third step, it is negative because the celestial is more idealized, more, let's say, inclined toward dreams, valuing the subtle aspect much more than the concrete one. There is a tendency to idealize, to romanticize, and if one is not careful, it can also lead to fantasizing. But naturally, a woman's emotional side is more celestial, whether we like it or not, no matter how much our society tries. To go against this, for a woman, it is much more important that a man is courteous than that he is handsome. There is no debate about this. People may not admit it, but internally, that is the truth. It is much more important for him to be courteous, honest, and kind than to be handsome, attractive, or charming. Because internally, our feelings are idealized. They seek the hero, they seek the Lancelot of the lake riding a white horse. They search for that image of the ideal being, and the celestial prevails over the earthly in emotions. And what about the mind? The mind tends to be positive, practical, and concrete. A woman tends to make her thoughts concrete, that is, to seek a practical use for what she is thinking about. She is not very inclined toward that unfolding, which sometimes happens in the male mind, of thinking without giving the thought a concrete objective. She tends to seek immediate applications for her thoughts in life. And with a man doing the opposite, the two would fit together. They would fulfill the idea of complementarity, harmony through opposition, and thus the cycle continues. Of course, all these characteristics can be taken to extremes, and then instead of virtues, you end up with flaws. For example, if a woman takes advantage of the fragility of her body, she may become weak. If she relies too much on her enduring energy, she may become stubborn. If she indulges excessively in her lofty feelings, she may become fanciful. If she relies too much on her very practical mind, she may find it difficult, for example, to engage with metaphysics or philosophical thought. Nothing in excess, no excesses. At their balance point, these characteristics would be ideal and would foster many positive things. And then you will see that, with these typical characteristics of each gender, Greek mythology goes on to build its own heaven, its own Olympus. These are the masculine and feminine ideals, first represented in gods, and later in heroes. This is quite interesting because Plato himself said that it is not enough to simply have a divine pantheon. You need heroes because a hero is a human being who is very much like you. If I tell you to be like Athena, to be like Artemis, well, they are divine beings. They are far ahead, very distant, and seem unattainable. But when you speak of a heroine, an ancient one like Penelope, she is a woman. And if she was able to do it, then we can too. Plato used to say that heroes remind us of how great we can become. Therefore, they are indispensable within the psychological life of humanity. So the Greeks had this. They had the divine archetypes, and they also had the heroes who were inspired by these divine archetypes. Now, observe, this here is the third Olympian generation. There are 12 gods. Because the history of Greek mythology is so intricate, it is truly astonishing. If you take the time to study Greek mythology, if you wish, you create the family tree of a hero, and it spans 4 generations. He is the cousin of someone, the son, the grandson, he had a grandson, and his cousin lived somewhere. I don't even know where. Their mythology possesses a complexity that is truly remarkable. So I have taken, in a very simplified way, the Greek pantheon of the third Olympian generation, which for them was the most important when the principal gods became established. Notice that there were 6 male gods and 6 female gods. We will see this in just a moment. Plato even said in his book The Laws that if there were an ideal city, do you know what he would do? He would divide this city into 12 neighborhoods and place the new Acropolis, the main temple, at the center, representing unity. So, let's say you have difficulty living with a certain human characteristic, for example, prudence. You would live in the neighborhood of Athena, and you would only move from there once you have overcome that difficulty. Then you could go to the neighborhood of Aphrodite. Do you understand? People would move through these neighborhoods according to their need for learning. Because in truth, the number 12, which is the zodiacal key, has always been represented as the zone of experiences of human consciousness. 1 + 2 = 3, which represents the sacred within humanity. It is the center. So it is said that a person will revolve within the circle of possibilities until they have mastered every point. And when you come to now, all the points of a circumference, you can then ask the fundamental question, which is where it originates. It originates at the center, which is invisible to the eyes, but it is from there that everything is born. A circumference is defined geometrically as a set of points equidistant from the center. So after you have mastered all human experiences, you begin to form a spiral. I passed through here and took 2% of Athena's experience. I passed again, 5%, 10%, until one day I embrace 100% of all human experience. This is wisdom. And then I reach the center. You will see that the Celts represented this as a cone. And at the very top, a star, which is our Christmas tree. A cone at the top with the star, a person who has reached the center. There was no such representation. And we'll see that. These gods still have some exquisite details, which I will not go into here. Each one is the child of a different Zeus. Each has a story behind them. Is this by chance? It is not. Within Greek mythology and the mythologies of these great peoples, the names of the gods and heroes, the etymology of their names, is not accidental. It already reveals what they are destined to do. Olympus itself comes from that which emerged from the limbo, from that which rose above the ordinary. Nothing is by chance. All the names have meanings. So the fact that among these gods we have 5 who are children of Kronos, 7 who are children of Zeus, 1 who is the daughter of Uranus, and then this 13th god, you might ask, how is that possible? 13th. Weren't there 12? The 13th is the center, which is the mystery. It is Hades, it is the mystery, it is the underworld, it is the Zeus of that which is hidden. Ah, but isn't that hidden place the underworld, the hell? No, it was not hell. In fact, Hades, when he transitions into Roman mythology, becomes Pluto, which comes from Plutos, meaning the rich, the generous one. It is the mystery that lies at the center of the human being. I don't know if you remember that the Knights of the Round Table were 12, but who was it that found the Grail? The 13th, who was Parsifal. So there is always the story, the myth of the 13th, which represents the center. It brings together the potentialities of the 12 into a single point. So what will interest us in particular? Here, just so you have an idea, this alone could be the subject of an entire course because the gods balance each other through opposition. For example, on one side you have Mars, who represents impulsive war, and on the other side you have Athena, who represents prudent war. They balance each other through opposition, they compensate for one another, they create dualities. Just this alone would be a celebration. I won't go into that detail, it's just to give you an idea, because nothing happened by chance there. Everything was very thoughtfully designed. So what will interest us? These 6, which are the 6 goddesses, half of the pantheon. Doesn't that seem like too much of a coincidence? Doesn't it to you? In other words, it's the yin and the yang, half masculine, half feminine balance, and the wheel turns. And these were the feminine archetypes, these 6 goddesses, each one of them amplifying a virtue that the feminine. So imagine this, when nature gave you the feminine or masculine sex, it gave you a box of potentialities, of latent powers. If you open it up, inside you will find the virtues of these 6 goddesses, which you can bring to the surface. At each moment of your life, depending on the experience you need, depending on the maturity you have, you will be able to use the archetypes of these 6 goddesses. This is a gift that nature has given you. Well, you might never open this box. You might simply survive without ever knowing who you are, dying a stranger to yourself. You might simply survive, not truly live. You might die without ever discovering this mystery, which is you. Or you can make the most of it. That is, nature did not place me here by chance. Let me see what it has to teach me. And then you will discover the universe within this little box. If you accept it, if you flow in harmony with nature and not against it. Do you understand? To learn from what nature offers us, we'll talk a little about them. Athena, Aphrodite, Artemis, Demeter, Hera, and Vesta. I took the 6 goddesses and I took 6 heroines. Greek heroines. What I wanted to show you is precisely how, in practice, the archetypes of these 6 goddesses are lived out. I chose 6 Greek heroines who were inspired by them, and the relationship is very clear. It clearly shows that at that moment, it does not mean that a woman has to live only as Athena her entire life. It means that for that heroine, in the situation where she became a heroine, which goddess did she call upon? What potential did you draw from within your own box? What was the tool that you used? What was the divine element that surfaced at the moment of that trial? So let's get to know the goddesses a little. Athena. This image is very beautiful, isn't it? It's from the Tribunal of Divine Justice in Austria. Athena is the goddess of wisdom. It's always interesting for those who become interested to learn a bit more about mythology. We study it quite a lot within philosophy. Nothing happens by chance. She is the daughter of Métis and Zeus. Métis represents prudence, and Zeus represents power. So when you combine prudence with power, what do you get? A power that is not destructive, that is measured, that is wise, that carefully observes where it steps, that is diplomatic, that moves forward without breaking anything. Exactly. It does what needs to be done, but it doesn't bump into things, it doesn't destroy. So it is constructive, it is civilizing. Why do you think the city of Athens is called Athens? Because she was the inspiration for culture and civilization. She is the goddess of this power, which is channeled through prudence. And for this reason, she stands in contrast to Mars, because Mars is impulsive. It is the controlled measure. Everything is channeled through great intelligence with much discernment, each thing in its own time, each thing in its own place. She is a goddess of culture, of civilization par excellence. Hence wisdom, which is a form of knowledge that knows how to enter the world, knows how to generate outcomes, causing the least possible harm, causing the least possible damage, interfering as little as possible with things, which is also the concept of diplomacy. So she is diplomatic, she is wise, she is thoughtful. And you will notice that this is a fundamental attribute of the lady. If you know, for example, let's talk about this. But when we talk about heroines, it is interesting to observe the history of a family clan. Sometimes, when the mother passes away and only the father or grandfather remains, after a few generations, the family is unable to maintain cohesion. However, if the mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, the matriarch remains as long as she lives, she is able to keep the group united. Have you ever noticed that? A force of cohesion, a central energy that the feminine possesses. We'll see this quite a lot in Vesta in a moment. She has this ability to bring together everything around her. And there is also much of Athena's prudence, who knows how to combine different things in a way that they do not clash. Sometimes, when the matriarch is lost, everything dissipates, no one sees each other anymore, and contact is lost. But as long as the matriarch is there, she is a point of unity. The whole family gathers at Christmas, at her birthday. At some moment she is a point of cohesion, which is typical of the feminine. So this is our Athena. And Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, of course we know this. Aphrodite has a very interesting characteristic. She is not the daughter of Zeus, nor is she the daughter of Kronos. We'll understand this in just a moment. This sequence of Olympian gods is very important. There was a certain moment when Uranus existed, who was the starry sky, the primordial universe. Neither space nor time had been born yet. The universe had not yet been divided. There was no heresy of separateness. Then Kronos is born, who represents time. Afterwards comes the one who surpasses Kronos, Zeus, who represents eternity. You will notice that each Zeus is the child of one of these three. She is the daughter of the first, she is the only one, the daughter of Uranus. There was no division in the world of Aphrodite's father. She comes from Aphros, meaning foam, right? She falls into the waters of the ocean and floats like foam, not allowing herself to be swallowed by the waters, which is also something interesting. Many times, for those who have attended my lectures, I talk about this, that water or horizontality is associated with matter. Fire, on the other hand, if you take a torch, no matter how you turn it, it always remains verticalis associated with the spirit. And water, no matter how you turn a container, always remains horizontal. Spirit and matter, the cross of the world. So this is something very common in myths. When something falls into the water and does not sink but floats, it is a sign that it has not allowed itself to be swallowed by materialism. In other words, a love that is not materialistic remains afloat, gazing at the sky, looking at the stars. She comes from the foam of the sea. Aphrodite is foam, and she is the daughter of Uranus. That alone is a clue that the love of Aphrodite is not just anything. Since she is the daughter of unity, she is born to generate unity in a time when everything is divided. That is where the concept of Greek love comes from. It is a very interesting concept which was expressed by a philosopher in the last century, Sri Ram, who said the following, that love is the recovery of unity within multiplicity. Do you remember that biblical concept? That Zeus unites, and man shall not separate. It is not a convention, it is something real. When you are able to truly merge two hearts, when love fuses two hearts, There is nothing in the world that can Cecilia merely seven if they are physically apart. Perhaps even by death, it is said that love is the recovery of unity within multiplicity. It overcomes this heresy of separateness, which makes us feel as if we have nothing to do with one another. It is capable of bringing together the hearts of two human beings as if they became one, whether through friendship, the relationship between parent and child, teacher and disciple, or between friends. It creates such a profound feeling that neither time nor space is able to separate it. So Aphrodite is a daughter of this world, a world where division did not yet exist. She comes into the world of division to promote unity. She is a daughter of unity. Love works toward the restoration of unity. If you truly love, it is as if in some way your heart and the heart of the other person become inseparable. Even if there is a physical distance, that distance does not exist on the level of feelings. So if it is true love, it is the realm of Aphrodite. And only this would truly be love. Artemis. This one is also quite interesting. Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo. Both are born from a goddess who is the goddess Leto or Latona, who was the goddess of modesty. Of modesty, reserve, humility with Zeus, who represented power. Do you notice that we have some curious combinations here? Power, when it passes through humility, through modesty, you see that this channel does not contaminate power as long as power enters the world pure. Let me try to explain this to you. I often give an example that I find very beautiful, the example from Taoist tradition, which says that a person should be like a bamboo pipe, clean, through which the breath of the spirit would enter from one side and come out the other as pure air. If a person is filled with dirt and dust, the breath of the spirit enters and what comes out the other side is dust. The light of the spirit should enter and come out the other side as well, light. But if a person is completely contaminated, what comes out is shadow. Then they say shadows were born into the world because humanity became opaque, became impure. So you can see that modesty is a characteristic of the human being when one is able to be so pure, so clean, that the laws of the universe pass through them and reach the world without being tainted. This is the attribute of Artemis. She watches over purity. She is so pure that the laws of the spiritual world pass through her. I often like to mention this because I find a Kantian concept very beautiful. Immanuel Kant used to say that there is no feeling greater than respect, because respect comes from respicia, which means to know how to see. He said, you do not respect someone's personality. You respect the humility that this person has to subordinate their own personality so that through them, the laws of the universe may reach the world. Do you understand this? I recognize that something elevated is shining through you, and that you had the humility to subordinate what is personal so as not to interfere. You did not let your personality get in the way, so that the light could come into the world through you. You became a bridge. This purity is Artemis. She is the daughter of humility and power. In other words, power, because of humility, comes into the world uncontaminated. If it were a vain person, they would obstruct the power. They would contaminate it, break the power for themselves. Do you understand? So this is the characteristic of Artemis, the pure one. It is the characteristic of the heroine she inspires. Respect comes from respice, to look once again to know how to see. We respect beings for what they are capable of channeling, and not for a personal characteristic of theirs. For being pure in truth. This is the essence of respect. Demeter is also quite interesting, because Demeter is already the daughter of Kronos, that god I mentioned to you, who represents time. So, she is the daughter of time and the daughter of Rhea. Rhea, the name Rhea, means to flow. Demeter, who is the mother goddess, the goddess of the harvest, of agriculture, of generosity, of that which gives life, is the daughter of flowing through time. Isn't that interesting? Flowing through the time of chronostas is another characteristic that is important for you to understand. I also often explain this in my classes, and I know some of you are already familiar with it. You meet someone on the street today and quickly form a psychological profile of them. You notice their flaws, their characteristics, their limitations. Then, you meet this person again 10 years later. She is physically older, but how is she psychologically? Such defects, such characteristics, such limitations, exactly the same. Did real time exist for this person? What do you think? Only clock time existed. And according to these traditions, that is an illusion. Biology fulfills its role. In other words, the body ages, but what would truly be your achievement, human growth, has not moved forward. Chronos is not clock time. Chronos is real time. It is measured by one thing: progress toward the human ideal. Progress toward Olympus, toward the world of Zeus. This is for those who study philosophy. It is one of the things we discuss when we explain ethics. If you were to ask a Greek what ethics meant, he would tell you, the path leads to Olympus, my friend. There is no doubt about it. The more ethical you are, the closer you are to Olympus. In other words, it was a concrete appreciation. It was not an artificial time. It was a time measured by growth. So, you realize that to flow through real time means to grow. Demeter represents this generosity that helps beings to grow, to generate and to give life. It is no coincidence that her name means Demeter, the mother goddess, who is the one that helps beings fulfill their cycle in life. Well, see that there are 3 goddesses who share these same parents, which is what gives them their particular characteristic. She, then, helps life to follow its course, to move through time growing from within. She does not only give birth to physical bodies, she is the mother of the human soul, in the sense of helping it to mature. Plato has a phrase that I find beautiful, in which he says, "The best thing we can do for those we love is to grow." Because only in this way can we offer them a reference point for what they themselves can become, to go ahead, to show how great they can become. This is also an act of generosity. Well, see that the heroines inspired by Demeter have this concern, to go ahead, to lead the way. Who else? Hera. You may have heard, perhaps, that Hercules' name in Greece was Hera, the glory of Hera. Precisely because Hera tested those who had the potential to become great, giving them challenges so that, once overcome, they could reach divinity, ascend to Olympus. Hercules became a god. So, Hera is the lady of pacts, of commitment. She shares the same lineage as Demeter. She is the daughter of flow and of real, chronological time. To flow through time, but now she offers another tool. It is not simply generosity, she is granting the ability to commit oneself to higher ideals. Do you understand this? We all have our own vulnerabilities within us, but we have a commitment. I'm committed to justice. In this situation, it would be easier for me to act otherwise, but my commitment to something greater does not allow me to be tempted by circumstances. It lifts me upward. So, I'm committed to honesty. There are many situations where corruption is easy. But my loyalty and honesty will remove me from those circumstances. They will pull me upward, vertically. It is as if you imagine a staircase. And the pact, the commitment to principles and values, is as if you have thrown a rope up there. And it will lift you to the next level. It will not allow you to be crushed by the circumstances of that level. A person who does not commit to values and virtues becomes a product of their environment. Because what will weigh upon you? The pressures of what everyone else is. If everyone is dishonest, why should I be honest? If everyone is selfish, why should I be fraternal? No, because I follow principles that are above all that. Principles are like something that lifts you up, that pulls you to another level. I do not follow what everyone else is doing. I follow what I have committed myself to. Commitment to the protocols of life, what the Greeks called sacred canons. The protocols of life elevates people. They do not allow individuals to be crushed by their environment, by the collective unconscious. Do you understand this? So, she is the guardian of the pact. Everyone who wishes to grow must turn to these pacts, to these sacred canons of Hera, and it is she who shapes the heroes. In a certain way, all heroes are children of Hera. You will see this both in the Greek tradition and in the Roman tradition, in the form of Juno. She is the one who shaped Aeneas. She is the one who lifts the heroes upward. She is represented by the peacock. Those eyes on its tail, according to Plato, signify the entire manifested universe. In other words, in the material world there are laws, there are pacts, there are protocols, divine laws that you must go through in order to grow. And Hera is the one who watches over these laws, the lady of commitment. So, while Demeter gives you generosity, Hera gives you commitment. Commitment, a latent and important power. Hestia, look how beautiful this is. Hestia, who was known as Vesta to the Romans, had a group of priestesses called the Vestals, who watched over the sacred fire. In the center of Rome, there was the Temple of the Vestals, where they tended the fire, which represented the very identity of Rome. Inside the homes, there was a fire, also tended by women, who believed that the fire was the foundation of their identity. It was the center. Where do you think the word hearth, for example, comes from? It comes from the household gods, the Lauras, who were kept at the center of the homes. Everything revolved around this sanctification of space. Once again, there is a quote from our friend Kant. He presents a moral attribute that I find very interesting, which closely resembles Greek thought. He says the following: imagine something that, for you, is very elevated, very noble, very sacred. Every time you are about to do something, think, I'm going to perform this act, am I doing it in the name of that? If you say no, that act cannot be done in the name of that. It is not worthy. That is a sign that you should not be doing it. He says that this is a moral attribute, of course, for you to recognize whether your action is aligned with the protocol of life, whether it can be made sacred. What I cannot do in the name of the sacred is a sign that I should not be doing it. It is a clear moral boundary. Everything that is necessary, everything that is sober, everything that contributes to life, could be Socratic. Why not? Even the simplest actions in life, like sweeping the floor, can be Socratic. Stealing, on the other hand, cannot. Isn't that so? So, in every situation, you have a very clear threshold for what is or is not worthy of a human being, for what is or is not moral. Hestia, or Estia, was the guardian of this central fire. Of the sacralization that prevents life from becoming trivial, from being lived in the name of just anything. Everything must be done in the name of something vertical, luminous, in the name of the spirit, which is the representation of fire. So, she is the guardian of the sacred aspect of life. So, every time we turn to the sacralization of life as a tool to gain strength, to keep ourselves from being swept away by trivialization and vulgarization, we are drawing upon the resources of Vesta, of Hestia. In the name of, whenever you are about to do something mentally, do it in the name of something. You will notice that you won't do it in the same way. You give value to that action. It becomes as if it were a small offering. It holds a special value. This invokes a sense of reverence. I cannot do it carelessly or in any manner. This represented the idea of the sacred, and she is also a daughter of the flow of time. Do you see how this is yet another resource for you to traverse time? The sacralization of life. When we Socratic life, we draw closer to transcending time, of the encounter with eternity. In fact, the sacred is precisely the function of giving meaning. It allows things to find their place in time and to transcend time. I won't go too deep into this etymology, otherwise we would never stop. So, this is a resource that Escher brings forth. And now let us turn to the heroines. Let us imagine how a human being can draw inspiration from these forces, these powers, in order to respond to critical situations in their life. As I was telling you, Plato says that here you have a human being. Within any tradition of humanity, here is a divine being. If you say, be inspired by Athena, it is very natural for us to respond, but isn't that too much? She has powers that I do not possess. She is a different kind of being. But if I say, be inspired by Penelope, who was a woman, and as a woman, had a body, with all the challenges that come with that body, and had emotions, with all the needs that emotions bring. So, if she can do it, I can do it too. It is humanly plausible. So, the hero, for Plato, reminds us of how great we can become. It restores to humanity the hope for greatness. It restores faith in the human being. So, he says, the hero is psychologically indispensable in society. When you consider that in our current times, we have more idols than heroes, take a moment to reflect on that. The average person is here, a family father, fulfilling his obligations. A man, for example, who follows the basic protocol of life. Our idols, sometimes, are down here, below this average person. Unbalanced people, full of vices, unstable, vain, superficial. Isn't that right? Idols manufactured by the media. Well, if idols are below the average person, they are pulling the average person down. A reference point that Iona para Bixo. This is psychologically very convincing, very persuasive, even though it is often unconscious. Plato spoke of the opposite, of the need to cultivate the memory of heroes. So, we'll talk about some typical Greek heroines who embody that spirit of the goddesses we have discussed. Antigone. Is anyone here from the field of law? People in the field of law usually study Antigone. She is an example of the discussion between natural law and positive law, the law of the gods and the law of men. A very beautiful story. Antigone is the daughter of Oedipus, the one from the Sphinx. When her father becomes blind, she is the only daughter who accompanies him until his death. Oedipus is buried in the walls of Athens, and she is by his side. Afterwards, she returns to Thebes, her hometown, where her two brothers, Eteocles and Polynices, lived. The two brothers had agreed to take turns ruling the throne of Thebes. They were both heirs of Oedipus and, therefore, both worthy of the throne. So, one would rule for 2 years, and then the other would rule for 2 years. Until the time came for Polynices to take over, but Eteocles refused to give up the throne. This led to a war between the brothers, and both died in that conflict. Their uncle, Creon, assumes the throne. Then, Creon fully sides with Eteocles and declares, "Look, Eteocles' body will be buried with the honors of a king. As for Polynices, I forbid him to be buried. His body will be left exposed to be devoured by wild beasts. No one is allowed to bury him. Polynices, anyone who did so would be sentenced to death." This held tremendous significance for the Greeks, as providing a dignified burial was a way to honor one's ancestors. This was of immense value from the perspective of Greek values. And so, Antigone initiates an entire discussion about the nature of divine law versus human law. And she decides she slips out in the dead of night and goes to bury her brother. She believes this is a fraternal duty she cannot break. Because she could not go on living if she betrayed her own conscience, that inner command she felt. It is that the law of the gods is superior to the law of men. The prologue of Antigone is quite interesting. It features a discussion between her and her sister. I've selected just a small excerpt so you can get an idea because her sister refuses to help her. And Antigone says, "No, I'll fulfill my sacred duty. I will not give up this aspect of the sanctity of life, of respect for the laws of life." It's not very difficult for you to imagine which goddess inspires Antigone at this moment. Who could it be? Wow! No. This is the goddess of the sacred, of divine laws, of obedience to divine laws. Iona says, "Do you really want to bury him, even though Creon's decree applies to the entire city?" She will say, neither of the two, that is, Creon's decree is not stronger than respect for a sacred custom. No one will be able to accuse me of failing to fulfill a pious duty. This question raised by Antigone is truly beautiful. Plato, in fact, has a dialogue in which he addresses exactly this subject, which is the Gorgias. When people come to Socrates and ask, "Aren't you afraid of dedicating yourself solely to the life of a philosopher? If you are accused in a court of law, which is what actually ended up happening, won't you be at a disadvantage, since you don't know the language of men, the interests of men, to defend yourself?" Then he says, "I am more concerned with another tribunal, where it'll be stripped of this body and will stand before the sacred. And before that tribunal, I'm absolutely certain of myself. As for the tribunal of men, I can never know whether I'm safe or not. Men are unstable and ever-changing. There is no point in chasing after the interests of men. What truly concerns me is the day I stand before the tribunal of the sacred. If I can, with complete serenity and awareness, say that I have respected its laws." In other words, she is a heroine who believes that there are divine laws. And she felt herself to be a citizen of these divine laws, which must be fulfilled above the will of men. That is, the sanctity of life above all else. Many times, how can a woman follow this path? Often, above the criticism of others, above the interests of her environment, she is able to devote herself to what she considers to be just. That child whom everyone says she should have already abandoned, that situation, that person she should have already given up on. The duty of her heart speaks louder than the conventions of men. She is capable of standing by them. You will notice that all 6 goddesses share a very strong characteristic. And the defining characteristic of the feminine, par excellence, is love. Everything revolves around love. The way they bring this love into the world is through the feminine channel. Thus, the divine law makes her feel committed to her heart, regardless of what the conventions of her time may dictate. This is a latent power, to recognize what is sacred in each moment, to recognize the divine law. The story of Antigone is very beautiful. Perhaps you know it. It is a play by Sophocles that you may come to know at some point. And also Permnestra. Strange name, isn't it? Hypermnestra is one of the Danaids. You may have seen a painting of them, those women who were endlessly filling a jar, and the jar would never fill up. They are her sisters, who were condemned to this fate when they descended to Hades. Hypermnestra means the one who is very prudent. The one who measures everything, perhaps even too much. Just from this description, you can already imagine who inspires her. She is basically a daughter of Athena, at least in this episode of the story. Her father, who was Danaus, was the king of Lydia, and his twin brother, who was Aegyptus obviously, was the king of Egypt. And she had 49 sisters. There were 50 princesses, known as the Danaids. And her uncle had 50 sons. What a coincidence, right? And evidently, he wanted them to marry so that he could acquire the kingdom of Lydia along with that of Egypt. Then her father flees, goes to the island of Argos, and takes all his daughters with him. But his brother keeps pressuring him. Iona. He says, you know what? He'll let my 50 daughters marry the 50 sons of Aegyptus. But then he gathered all his daughters and said, on the wedding night, kill your husbands. This way, he'll put an end to the sons of Aegyptus once and for all, and solve my problem. On the wedding night, kill your husbands. We will settle this matter right away. And so it was done. The 50 princesses of Argos were married to the 50 princes who ruled. All of them fulfilled their father's will, except for Hypermnestra. She decides. She considers other elements beyond her father's opinion, anger, or resentment. She says, if the man who married me is a just man, a man of integrity, I cannot kill him. It would be as if I were killing an attribute of the divine itself. I cannot do that. So I need to know who he is. First, she marries Lynceus. Lynceus means lynx-eyed, someone with deep vision. She comes to him and says, since our marriage was something decided by our parents, there is no love between us. I ask that you do not touch me tonight, that you respect me. He looks at her and sees that she is worth respecting. She had value, she deserved that. So, he respects her chastity and does not touch her on their wedding night. And she does not kill him. Because of his respect, his dignified and ancient posture, she says, he does not deserve this. I will not do it. Her father condemns her harshly, but the gods condemn her 49 sisters and say that she is right. This prudence, this good sense to seek to reflect for oneself, to perceive what is appropriate in each moment, to know how to judge each situation not by the collective, not by what others think, not by what others decide, not by passion, but by a deep prudence. Do you remember the practical mind of the woman? Capable of seeking what is most appropriate for the heart, because the law of the heart is the law of the feminine. In other words, if he is a noble being, I will not kill him. I will give him a chance to prove to me that he is noble, and he proves himself, and she spares her husband. He is the only one among the princes of Egypt who survives. And Permnestra is condemned by her father and acquitted by the gods. And then her sisters are condemned in Hades to spend eternity filling a leaking jar. In other words, it could never be filled. That is their punishment. You can see some paintings depicting these young women filling a jar. It is quite common, the Danaids. So, here we have yet another goddess clearly inspired by Athena. Prudence is what restrains impulse, what contains passions, and is capable of inspiring balanced action. Imagine, everyone, this within that little box that was given to every woman. A latent power from the divine. Do you understand? The perception of what is just, as with Antigone, of what is divine law, of what is dharma, as the Eastern traditions say, and the prudence to act not out of impulse. Well, see what comes next. Remember that all of them, in a certain way, are daughters of Hera because they are heroines. All of them went through trials and overcame these challenges in a human and wise manner. That is why they became heroines. Alcestis, are you familiar with her? Alcestis, her name means the courageous one. It's very interesting because her husband, Admetus, was the king of a city called Pherai, and he truly was a fierce man. Her father had declared that any suitor who wished to win her hand, her father, Oco, who was the king of Pelia, said that anyone who wanted to marry Alcestis had to arrive in a chariot drawn by lions and wild boars. And Admetus was so fierce that he actually managed to tame lions and wild boars, and thus he won Alcestis' hand. She married him and loved him, fully aware that he was a passionate and impetuous spirit. And she tried, in her own way, to temper him, to teach him. There comes a certain moment when they are about to perform the sacrifices required for the wedding ceremony. And he offers sacrifices to all the gods, pays homage, makes offerings to every deity except Artemis. He forgets Artemis. He forgets about purity because he himself was not pure. He was choleric, very impetuous, he was not pure. So, unconsciously, he forgets Artemis. Artemis casts a curse upon him, declaring that he would die unless someone gave their life for him. At that point, he feels quite at ease, thinking, well, I'm a king, and there are many subjects who owe me a great deal. My parents love me, this will be easy. All I have to do is make it known, and there will be plenty of people willing to give their life for me. Yes, that's right. He gathers the entire city, his whole family, and tells them the story. Who will give their life for me? Who? No one. Not a single subject, not one of his ministers, not even his parents. No one wanted to give their life for me. And then Alcestis, his young wife, steps forward. Virtuous, courageous, she says, I will die for him. Do you see how interesting this is? This profound love, this capacity for sacrifice for those we love. Who is the goddess of deep and true love? Aphrodite. Alcestis is the daughter of Aphrodite. And she sacrifices herself and gives her life for her husband. But, fortunately or perhaps by fate, she makes the sacrifice, and Admetus is deeply moved, because he expected this from everyone except her. At that moment, Hercules was passing by. And Hercules, on his way to one of his trials, one of his labors, says, What? What an outrage for death to come and take such a virtuous woman, I will not allow it. So, he stands by Alcestis' bedside and confronts death. Don't you notice it's a bit dark in here? He drives death away. He says, You will not take a virtuous woman. Stand back, you will not have her. Goodbye. Then, Hercules chases death away himself and saves Alcestis. This capacity for profound sacrifice out of love. How women possess this remarkable ability. Well, she is not so attached. Well, see this. Soon, we will also see this in another heroine who embodies it deeply. She is not so attached to things, but if there is one element that is fundamental for a woman, it is those she loves. And she is capable of great efforts, of great sacrifices. Her heart is the most sacred aspect for a woman. It is both her greatest strength and her greatest weakness, because through it comes longing, which is where she is made vulnerable. It is her point of fragility. So, Alcestis is the courageous one for love. Her love was of great value. She is capable of giving her life for those she loves, the sacred offering that belongs to those who truly love. She is the daughter of Aphrodite. One more element for you to add to your collection. Iphigenia. It is also quite obvious whose daughter she is, because she is the daughter of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra. That queen back there was the sister of Helen of Troy. And Agamemnon, you may have heard from Greek tales, was not exactly the most virtuous of kings. Agamemnon was not all that great between us. He was a king who was rather a bit of a tyrant. And he was determined and really wanted to bring down Troy. When the Trojans took Helen, he said, now it's my turn. Now I have a reason for this. He used that as a pretext, and he united all of Greece to attack Troy. So everyone gathered at the port, because at that time the city was Mycenae. Mycenae was the center of the world. So Mycenae had the most powerful king, which was Agamemnon. Then he gathered the Greek ships. Everyone was there, all prepared to set sail against Troy. Do you know what happened? There was no wind. All the ships depended on sails. But there was no wind, not even the slightest breeze. There was absolutely no wind, and they just stood there, all those warriors, everyone growing impatient, saying, come on, well, but still, there was no wind. So he decided to consult an oracle to find out what was happening. The oracle said that he had to sacrifice his purest daughter, who was Iphigenia, to Artemis. And when he sacrificed Iphigenia, the wind would blow, and the ships would then be able to set sail for Troy. So what does he do? Of course, he wasn't going to tell his wife, bring the girl, he'll kill her. His wife would never agree to that. The girl was very virtuous and was a priestess of Artemis. So he sends word this man here is Achilles, the great hero Achilles. He sends word to the mother saying that he is going to marry Iphigenia to Achilles, that she should bring her, that Achilles is a great hero. It is an honor bring Iphigenia because he'll marry her to Achilles. But when they arrive, that is when he reveals that the girl is to be sacrificed. Achilles tries to defend her. This is a scene depicted in a painting illustrating a passage from the Iliad. He wants to kill Agamemnon. He cannot accept it. And Iphigenia herself says, no, let it be done this way. If this is necessary for events to take their course, I offer my life for that. She calms her mother, she calms Achilles, and says, he'll go to the sacrifice. I sacrifice myself for something greater, so that history may unfold. What is to be done in Troy is necessary, and therefore, if my life serves this purpose, it is better than serving no purpose at all. I give my life for this. She stops Achilles from defending her and goes to the place of sacrifice. But, as is very common in many myths, at the last moment, Artemis intervenes. She puts a deer in her place. What is sacrificed is the doe. And Iphigenia ends up in Aulis and becomes a high priestess of Artemis. This element of purity, of sacrifice, because, in truth, what was sacrificed was an animal, that animal self. You remember that Artemis represents exactly this purity, which sacrifices all that is coarse so that the impulse, so that the divine spirit may enter the world. She sacrifices her animal self so that she may be pure enough for the story to unfold and for her to become an instrument of history. And there is an absolute trust that whatever was meant to happen would be just. In other words, very much like what we saw with Antigone as well, an absolute trust. There is a story that I'll tell you now, a very beautiful story from the Celts, just to leave you wanting to attend this lecture someday. They say that this is the characteristic of a true king. He trusts in the divine law. She knew that whatever was meant to happen would be just. And what is it that dies? It is her animal self. And she purifies herself and becomes a high-level priestess, purer, closer to Artemis. This purity comes from knowing how to sacrifice passions, interests, and selfishness so that something greater can be accomplished. Do you realize how many times in her life a woman is called upon to do this? For example, when she has a child, Socratic sleep, Socratic rest. Sometimes we must Socratic temper our own hearts to be just with that child, even though, in truth, we want to give everything to them. We know we must give only what is good for their growth. Isn't that so? To be just, sometimes to be firm, even when it pains the heart. To be able to sacrifice personal interests so that goodness can be realized through you. This ability to subordinate the personal, to sacrifice the personal, so that the divine law may be fulfilled, so that the ships may set sail, so that Troy may be conquered, so that history may unfold in the most just way possible. Thus, the purity of Artemis is Iphigenia. Iphigenia is precisely the pure one. Her name represents this. So, clearly, she is a daughter of Artemis. Keep putting all of this into your own mental box. These are the tools we have within the feminine. They are us. This is not a distant mythology from another people. It is us. These are our latent powers. Ariadne, beautiful Ariadne. I don't know if any of you, does anyone here like opera? Richard Strauss has an opera called Ariadne auf Naxos. The second act of this play is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen. It is truly beautiful. Ariadne, her name comes from Aria, meaning noble. She represents the human soul in the myth. You must have heard of Minos and the Minotaur. That one is quite well known, very popular. Minos was a king who ruled over the island of Crete. And on this island, one day, he performs a sacrifice. He makes an offering to Poseidon, and Poseidon, to demonstrate his divine power, causes a white bull to emerge from the waters, beautiful, magnificent. And the intention was for that bull to be sacrificed to Poseidon himself. But Minos finds the bull so beautiful that he decides not to Socratic. Poseidon sees this as an offense, a disrespect to the sacred. And then he asks Aphrodite for help so that Minos' wife, Pasiphae, falls in love with the bull. She unites with the bull and gives birth to a monster, who had the head of a bull and the body of a man, which is the Minotaur. Then the architect Daedalus builds the labyrinth and locks the Minotaur in its center. Yet, 7 young men and 7 maidens from Athens are regularly sent to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. Until one day, a hero arrives. Theseus, prince of Athens and son of Egeuswo, declares, "I'll go as well. Now they'll put an end to this. I will slay this monster." However, when he arrives there, the problem was not just about killing the monster. The monster lived at the center of the labyrinth. How could anyone enter and then leave the labyrinth? It was extremely complicated, precisely so that the monster could not escape. If he went in and killed the monster, he would not be able to get out. Then Ariadne, who is the daughter of Minos, a princess, recognizes his nobility, his worth, and gives him a silver thread. She tells him to unwind this ball of thread as he goes. After you kill the monster, you wind it back up and follow it to return here. And that is exactly what he does. And when he comes out, he escapes from the island of Crete, taking Ariadne with him. But then, along the way, just imagine, I'm a prince from a city like Athens, powerful. I will return covered in glory. There will be women running after me. I'm bringing a princess and I will arrive already married. That is not going to be a good deal. So he decides to stop on an island, Naxos, and abandons Ariadne there and leaves. From that point on, you will notice that he only makes foolish decisions. His story unfolds like this. He fights with the Amazons, steals, and Hippolyta ends up taking her own life. He goes to Sparta, kidnaps Helen, and then her brothers go there, kidnap his mother, and it turns into a big mess. He descends into the underworld to try to abduct Persephone, is imprisoned by Hades, and will only be freed by Hercules much later. He only got himself into trouble after he abandoned Ariadne, because Ariadne represents the human soul, precisely that silver thread that allows you to enter the labyrinth of life without getting lost. She guides you. She is the daughter of Demeter, the daughter of generosity. Demeter is the great educator, the one who leads and guides. You know that the root of the word pedagogue comes from agoagos, which means to lead children. It is about knowing how to guide others through the labyrinths of life. She gives him her silver thread so that he can enter the labyrinth of life and emerge safely. She guides him. She is his soul. But Theseus, he killed a minotaur, which is the minotaur of physical instincts. But he was devoured by another, the minotaur of pride and vanity. When he emerges, he allows himself to become conceited, and he is not worthy of his soul. He still does not possess enough nobility, because Ariadne represents precisely that nobility. Her name comes from Aria, meaning the noble one. He is not worthy of uniting with his soul. Then, as some say, whether kindly or not, as you prefer on his journey, aboard his ship, the god Dionysus himself appears to him and says, "Look, you are not worthy of this woman. In fact, you do not even love her." It is said that back on the island of Crete, he had already fallen in love with her sister, Phaedra, who seemed more beautiful to him. Phaedra means bright, the one who shines, the one who radiates brilliance. He needed brilliance, he was vain. Later, he would even marry Phaedra.
So Dionysus says, to him, this woman is not for you. Leave her in Naxos. Naxos means to be born. Leave her there. And he abandons her. When she awakens, she is alone on the island of Naxos, abandoned by the man for whom she gave everything. Then, at that moment, Dionysus appears, the god of enthusiasm. The end house, the god within oneself. And our soul once again reunites with the sacred. Do you remember the three worlds I mentioned to you? Our soul reunites with the sacred and allows the body to experience a few more adventures, which is Theseus. Dionysus is a very curious god, because if you look at any other god in Greek mythology, they have countless partners. Dionysus had only one woman in his life, and that was Ariadne. He is the only monogamous god I know of on Olympus. He had only Ariadne. Only she was noble enough for him. He goes to the island of Naxos and takes her away, and the two are united. They unite on Olympus and hope that one day, perhaps Theseus will be worthy, so that the three worlds may be joined once again. Lucario Silva. This is the same structure as the Grail in the myth of King Arthur, the union of the three worlds. So, Ariadne represents this generosity, the educator, the one who gives the thread, who marks the path, the silver thread, so that beings may enter the labyrinths of life and find their way out. She represents the one who gives life, the greatest generosity, which is to guide beings so that they may truly live not only on the physical plane, but also on the spiritual plane. She guides Theseus so that he may overcome the trials of life. She is the educator. This is also a very distinct characteristic of the feminine, the ability to bring forth to reveal, that is to bring out the very best that human beings have within them. And there is no better tool for this than love. Love overcomes barriers. A great educator must know how to work with this attribute of love. Ariadne represents this ability to break down barriers and penetrate the hearts of beings and lead them out of the labyrinth. It is the greatest generosity.
Where does this Greek god, who is the Roman Bacchus, come from?
Yes, exactly.
The movie about the party.
That's right, this whole story about having to spend a long time to clear the name of Dionysus. Because it fell into enthusiasm, or endios, meant that, at a certain moment, a person had perceived God within themselves. They would devalue external things and attain a state of theophany, a union with the divine. To ordinary people, this seemed like madness. As this declined, it was said that the Dionysian rites were the acts of madmen became known as the Bacchanals. But that's a long story for us to explain here. Dionysus, in fact, is raised by Cybele in Thrace. She teaches him her mysteries, the mystery of the Cuorides. It's a long story, in which he learns the secret of taming lions because Cybele rode in a chariot drawn by 200 lions and of discovering the divine within himself, the entheos, the enthusiasm. This encounter would generate a state of ecstasy, as if it were a mystical union, a theophany. It's interesting because all the priests of Dionysus, when they went on stage in the Greek theater during the Dionysian festivals, all of them wore the mask of the god. In other words, it was as if, in that moment, everyone found unity in the divine. There are many details. This story is long, and we really can't tell it all right now. I need to tell you about the symbolism of wine, about the symbolism of his birth, because he was born twice. He was first born as Zagreus and then as Dionysus. I know he is one of the purest and most sacred gods in the book. If it weren't for him, the gods would not have defeated the Titans. It is he who brings about the victory over the Titans. And this luminous god then rescues Ariadne, who was abandoned on Naxos. So, this is yet another element for your toolbox. The educator, the generous one, the daughter of Demeter. And finally, our friend Penelope. She is also quite well known, isn't she? Ulysses. Ulysses is a controversial figure in this context. We also need to launch a campaign to reclaim the image of Ulysses because he is also a complex character. Within the structure of Greek mythology, Ulysses clearly represents reason. You can see that they only won the war against Troy because of his traps, his cunning. The Trojan horse was his idea. He begins to develop mental sharpness. It's no coincidence that he is protected by Athena at all times, because of this rational aspect he possessed. However, Ulysses' name in Greece is Odysseus. Odysseus comes from the word meaning angry or wrathful. Once again, we see the aspect of anger. Before he could be worthy of uniting with his soul, Ithaca, the island where he lived, had to go through a process of purification along the way, which is the Odyssey. He encounters many monsters along the way, monsters that were within himself. He must learn to master himself before he can unite reason with the spiritual. So, he ends up fighting with Poseidon. He spends 10 years battling in Troy, as do the other heroes. All the others return home. After the Greeks win Troy, he spends another 10 years journeying back home. That alone was a kind of hell. It was an odyssey. He encountered all the monsters of the world in the midst of the world. He was always very cunning, but he still needed to overcome the fundamental element, his arrogance, his selfishness. As long as he hadn't done that, he could not return home. It's very interesting to notice that he loses everything along the way. He loses most of his men, then he loses all the ships except his own. Then he loses his sailors, loses his ship, and ends up falling into the water. Then God comes to him and says, "Look, I'll give you a veil. Take off all these clothes and cover your heart with this veil. And come to the surface with only this veil, for that is how you will find your way home." He is truly only able to reach Ithaca in this way. When he strips himself of everything, his selfishness, his vanities, and protects only his heart. He protects his heart with the divine. He comes to the surface and finds the flock of birds that guide him home. Meanwhile, who was in Ithaca? Penelope, for 20 years. Can you imagine? It is an island, the king, the empty throne, and she preserves the myth of Ulysses, the greatness of Ulysses, the structure, the laws. Nothing stops working, and everything remains there, waiting for Ulysses to return. His mother gives up, takes her own life, but Penelope does not give up. And there remains Penelope. Her name comes from Peen, meaning thread, and opus, meaning eye. She is the eye that knows how to keep the thread intact. That quality is unique to her, the daughter of Hera, of the laws, of the divine laws. And she preserves the path home so that Ulysses can return. It would all be for nothing if Ulysses were to overcome all the trials, but when he arrived in Ithaca, Penelope had married someone else, the island had been ruined, and the throne destroyed. It would be meaningless. Do you see how she keeps Ithaca alive so that he can return home? There is a passage where Homer says something I find beautiful. He says that Mycenae was the greatest city in the world, and Ithaca was a rocky island. But Mycenae fell, and Ithaca persevered. Ithaca was preserved. Do you know why? Because Mycenae had Clytemnestra, and Ithaca had Penelope. It was a woman who made that kingdom truly great. Clytemnestra did not deserve Mycenae. Penelope deserved more than Ithaca. She kept the island intact, as if virtue itself resided there. She was his wife. And then, after 20 years, or rather, even along the way, of course, whoever married her would become king. And beyond that, she was a very beautiful woman, so suitors began to appear. And she had no way out of that situation, because even the laws of Ithaca itself required that Ithaca have another king. And she, preserving all the memory, all the mythology of Ulysses, believed that he would return. She never doubted it for a single moment. Then she said the following: "I'll weave a tapestry. When it is finished, it will be a shroud for my father-in-law, Laertes. When it is finished, I will choose a suitor." What did she do? At night, she would unravel everything. The next day, she would weave again. But she kept the thread intact. And through this thread, Ulysses one day returns home, reclaims his throne, and finds Ithaca just as he left it. Do you notice this quality of patience, perseverance, of never giving up on those you love? The ability to maintain the order of the home, the protocols of life. She is a daughter of Hera. Nothing in Ithaca can stop functioning. In fact, nothing is allowed to fall apart. Iona, I think she must have been a better queen than Ulysses was king. He was king, perfect. He finds Ithaca intact. The throne waiting for him, an entire mythology built around his name. She preserves the laws of life. She is very much that matron who keeps the whole family gathered around her. She follows the protocols of life and keeps the thread intact, so that all those she loves can return, and she never doubts. She never stops having hope in those she loves. She never gives up. She is a symbol of patience, perseverance, and adherence to the protocols of life. A symbol of a faithful woman, but not faithful to her husband, faithful to herself. Do not think that she did this only because of Odysseus. She did it for herself, for the dignity she possessed, for who she was a queen. She is the symbol of a dignified woman who follows the protocols of life, who respects herself, and who does not give up on those she loves. The characteristics that became associated, thus immortalized, but we, as we tend to trivialize everything, say she is the symbol of the faithful wife. She was not only faithful to Odysseus, she was faithful to herself. She was a queen. She ruled over all the weaker elements of her own personality. A daughter of Hera. She mastered the manifested world, which is the peacock's tail, ensuring that a kingdom continues unbroken. So she is this center, this sacred aspect that organizes all of life. One more tool for our toolbox. And now it's over. But you can see the potential. Of course, if I were to give you a lecture, maybe one day we will, if it doesn't sound too odd in the masculine ideal, where we look at the 6 gods, because it's the same thing. No one here is saying that anyone is superior to anyone else. If you look at the 6 Greek gods, you'll also find an incredible potential. The union, the marriage of the two is perfect because it represents the human archetype, the human ideal. This shows how much they imagined a lady could be magnificent. They also imagined that a knight could be magnificent because they believed in humanity. And they left this represented in their symbols. So, if you take all of this, it is what they hoped for, together with these 6 heroines. It is everything they said lies dormant within the heart of every woman, as potential. This was the feminine ideal for Greek mythology. To be a child of the goddesses means that, whether we want it or not, they live within our soul as a potential that was given to us by nature. Whether or not it is awakened depends on us. So, to conclude, I brought you a phrase that I find very beautiful from our international director, Professor Dari Stamer Guzman, in which she says the following: since always and forever, every woman is related to the first shining star that brought light to the deep blue of the sky. In other words, this brilliant light that shines in the night, precisely because the night is associated with this world. The material world, where things are sometimes lacking, where children need to be held. And she is the star that guides, that provides a point of reference, that gives hope, that brings brilliance. This shining star in the night has always been associated with the feminine, since always and forever. What Greek mythology offers are the attributes of this feminine star. That's it, a brief excerpt, because, as I told you, if we were to develop it, we could give a talk about a heroine like that. Easily. We could give a whole lecture on one of these goddesses, an entire lecture, without difficulty. What we did here was just a small overview, just so you can perceive the treasure that exists within these traditions from our past. How much we could use this to know ourselves. This is not something of the past, it is present. In essence, we are still the same fears. We have not changed that much. And this potential, these 6 goddesses, exist dormant within every woman. And now I open the floor for questions, if there is anything I can clarify, anything that might be useful to you, and that I also know. Okay. In fact, in terms of literature, of Greek mythology, we actually have an advantage in Brazil. We have a very good author, Junito de Souza Brandão. He is excellent, very appropriate, and the things he says are very sensible. We do not always have the same good fortune when it comes to Egyptian mythology or Celtic mythology. A good bibliography is rare. You know, within the philosophy course, we study these mythologies using a specific booklet, but that is educational material for us. But as for public books, Junito is excellent. Junito de Souza Brandão, both his work on Greek mythology and the Mythosetymological dictionary he wrote. He takes the names and creates a deciphering dictionary of what those names mean. It's so fascinating, everyone. If you know what the name Theseus means, or the name Oedipus, you already have an idea of what he is going to do, more or less. You get a sense, because the essence of what he will do, his role in the world, is already present in the etymology of his name. A very beautiful story. For example, if you look into why Plato created the Academy, why did he choose that name? Academy, who was the hero? Academy? In Junito's book, it explains what the name Academy means. Each name, what is its origin? What is its etymology? What did it mean? A very useful book. Very much so. Now, afterwards, in order to bring all this information together and make sense of it, you need philosophy. It will give you the raw material. Then, when it comes to combining these pieces and building a coherent interpretation, that's when you need philosophy. Anything else, everyone? I'd like to remind you that our lectures, this one, for example, is being recorded today. We have many interesting DVDs on this subject, about the feminine ideal, about love, about Khalil Gibran and love, which is also a very interesting lecture, all dealing with related topics. So, if you're interested, and, by the way, all our lectures are also available on YouTube. It's an interesting option for us on the weekends, when sometimes we don't have anything to do. The movies have terrible titles, so taking time for a philosophical reflection, watching a good lecture. They're all available for free on YouTube, and each DVD costs 10 Brazilian reals. It's a good option, a great suggestion. All right?